Hello, everybody. I think we are live now. So I just want to welcome. Hello. I would like to welcome everyone here in person and everybody who is online and watching on YouTube. Welcome to the People's Forum. My name is Mia. I'm part of the research team here at the People's Forum. And if you haven't been here before, TPF is a popular and political education space dedicated to uniting the struggles of the working class. So continue to stay tuned to our programming, our future classes, our future book talks, our future culture events, and everything. So as the capitalist news cycle trudges on, it's been a while, and I certainly haven't seen this come up in my mainstream media feed, but as most of us know, or as we should all know, on February 20th, a 7.8 magnitude earthquake struck the border of Turkey and Syria. The death count has now reached over 50,000 dead. There are 1.7 million people displaced. Key infrastructure in the region was destroyed. And due to a number of historical factors and conditions that will certainly be addressed today, it has been an ongoing struggle to provide comprehensive rescue and aid. So the earthquake was not caused by any particular actor, but it certainly exposed and revealed major cracks in the system, historical factors, and underlying social, political, and economic conditions that have been accumulating for years and years. So we're so excited to have with us Ekim Kelic, who is a Kurdish journalist from Turkey, and he is corresponding to a daily working class newspaper, Evrensel Daily. Evrensel means universal. And their reporters are currently on the ground following the multidimensional crisis in the disaster area in the region. And with that, I will pass it off to Ekim.
Thank you, Mia. So, first of all, I want to thank you, comrades from the People's Forum, for making this event happen today. My name is Ekim Kelic, a correspondent of Evrensel Daily. As Mia said, in English it means universal. It's a daily working class newspaper of Turkey, and our paper has been circulating since 1996 and covering anything related to working class and the oppressed, together with the fields of culture, science, sports, politics in general. And I am myself also working as an adjunct at the political science in City University of New York. Today I will present on earthquake and the humanitarian crisis in Turkey. I will first talk about the earthquake and happenings in a reporter tone. Those are numbers, stories, and political and social developments. Then I will give an overview how we end up with this point through an explanation of relationship between neoliberalism and one man's dictatorship, a framework that we name today is authoritarianism in Turkey. I'm not going to talk about Syria specifically, but we'll mention Syrian refugee workers and Turkish politics on Syria. Also, today is one of the major takes. Please keep in your mind, for us, earthquake is natural, but its consequences are political and socio-economic, and that's going to be one of our first major points in today's teaching. So, if you may play the first video, that to give at least a sense of like what the earthquake looks like. Okay, thank you, Saidi. So the video that you saw, it's from one of the Arab Alevi city in Turkey, Hatay, which is the most destroyed city right now. So basically, since February 6th, our country has been experiencing an indescribable days of suffering, devastation, and hopelessness. On that Monday of February 6th, two waves of quakes, 7.7 and 7.6, hit 11 provinces. According to a report, the total number of buildings in the region where the earthquake took place was announced as 717,614. After the disaster, it was the government officials decided to demolish 90,609 buildings, which were determined as heavily damaged and ruined immediately. The total number of destroyed buildings in the disaster area was announced as 18,200. For your imagination, the earthquake covered an area of 288 miles from New York to Washington, D.C. The formal body count right now, as of today, just for Turkey, just passed 45,000. And these are the numbers coming from the hospital morgues. Thousands of people are still missing. For example, although the rubbles of one of the hotel in Adıyaman, Isias Hotel, was completely removed and 65 bodies were found, dead bodies. 85 people who were supposed to be in that hotel during the earthquake could not be found. But there is no more rubbles over there. To give a clue, more than 13.5 million people live in 11 provinces that hit by these quakes. Turkish authorities says that more than 2 million people left the region now. And there is a huge internal migration. As opposed to how it's internationally served, Turkish authorities didn't send any help first at least 3 days after the earthquake. Earthquake happened on Monday, February 6th, and there was no rescue team, no ambulance, no aid groups, nothing from the Turkish state first 3 days. Some accounts of citizens will help you to visualize the disaster. For example, an earthquake victim who our reporters understand that he has strong religious beliefs, says that when they ran outside, there were snow and snowstorm and rain. And it was one of the coldest weather in this region in the last years. That person told our friends that he thought our end came as humanity. It should be apocalypse. It was that big, that traumatic for the people. So consider a situation where you are out there, either under the rubble or you have loved ones under the rubble at the middle of cold winter, and there are no help. Because of that, a lot of people died under the rubbles out of hypothermia, since the region is experiencing a harsh winter, or they died because of there was no air, basically. Among such situations, you might see that people even cannot find corpse bags for their dead relatives. That was one of the demand, actually, that recently came up. The Turkish state's inability to reach some places do still continue. They, for example, did not bring any aid almost first 4 or 5 days to particular provinces, especially Hatay, Antioch, that the region you just saw on the video. And it is not just a particular pattern for only a branch of state. For example, the army as an institution had to be mobilized much more effectively. First 3 days, however, there were 3,500 soldiers according to the regional sources, but after the public outburst, almost 20,000 troops were deployed in total after the third day. Even then, soldiers were not, as local says, were not directed to clean the rubbles and rescue victims effectively in the first week. There are 2 reasons for that, as experts comment on that. One is, we later explain that one man's dictatorship does not recognize any other intermediate authority, So state institutions cannot act autonomously. But the second reason is that most of the troops of the southeastern command of Turkish army are in northern Syria right now to keep Kurdish region in check and have a space at the bargaining table after long Syrian conflict ends. So you can imagine people's vulnerability, solutionlessness, and rage. First responders, revolutionaries, socialists, progressives, and working people in general say that the scene is so savage in which you go into a street, basically, and from under the rubble you hear the voice of people say, "Help, rescue us," everywhere. Unfortunately, rescuers do not hear those voices anymore. I mean, in most of the cases. However, first 3 days, an enormous people's solidarity revived also too. All centers across the countries, townships, everywhere fulfilled with volunteers to carry the aid packages, load them to the trucks, lorries, and organize campaigns. The first responders just hopped on the buses to go to the region. International rescue teams organized by other countries. And these examples basically became a source of motivation and hope for us and our people. But again, that becomes another a reason why the Erdogan government declared a state of emergency, SOE, or in our language, OHAL, in earthquake provinces. The third day, while people under the rubbles were still tweeting their addresses, because basically they want to be found, they don't want to die, calling others to rescue them, the government blocked Twitter, the Twitter social media platform, to suppress oppositional voices. Luckily, it was lifted after social outburst again. However, Erdogan spoke to televisions to threaten people on the ground with his most vicious look. During similar time, the Ministry of Environment, Urbanization and Climate Change, Murat Kurum, said that we will not allow any coordination other than the formal state AFAD coordination. AFAD is the Disaster and Emergency Management Presidency. It's a government institution now at the top of everything. However, the irony is that they did not send anything at the first week. They did not organize anything effectively. And still there is almost no state when it comes to the aid. You might see that examples coming, for example, workers and union organizers say that what AFAD bureaucrats do during all day is that they are just bossing workers around and others, hazing in a way, harassing the workers. On the other hand, journalists say that union workers are way more challenging when it comes to the challenge the bosses, when it comes to challenge the dodgies, right? But when it comes to these small passive-aggressive behaviors, but union workers, in these cases, when they are cleaning the rubbles, they try to be silent in the face of these attitudes of AFAD bureaucrats. So rescue operations won't be interrupted. So they can rescue the people, the leaves over there. And you may tell me that maybe these bureaucrats are just the people who have bad nature, but no, most of them are affiliated with the Erdogan's party, Justice and Development Party, AKP, and as it's exposed with this disaster, it's a very corrupted state institutions where AKP feeds off some of their supporters through basically giving salary through that institution. You can see the similar examples of corruption in the Turkish Red Crescent. Some days ago, a scandal emerged as the Red Crescent sold disaster tents and second-hand aid clothes to AHPAP, a social aid organization trying to stay apolitical. Because Red Crescent has to be normally, it's supposed to be an independent aid organization, but Erdogan government transformed Red Crescent from a disaster relief association to a Red Crescent investment holdings. some years ago, in 2019 it should be. And that's supposed to be, again, be independent relief organization, but it turned into a corrupted state institution. Going back to SOE, or HAL, state of emergency, there are other reasons for that. By using state of emergency, they, for example, trustees were appointed to some Alevi Cemevis. These Cemevis are places for worships for Alevis, which is a religious and cultural sect within Islam. And as an important note, they have been persecuted minority due to their beliefs for a long time, and still you may see the discrimination. In this sense, the state of emergency is an attempt to suppress social and political solidarity, to wipe it out from the earthquake area. For example, again, they also wanted to prevent oppositional press providing proper information to the people, to the public. But that was not that much possible, because the region looks like a war-torn region now, as you already saw from that video. And there are towns and cities where nothing left, actually. And when I say nothing, I mean nothing. Like in Hatay, which again we saw and mentioned before, a city where it's historically Arab Alevi, first responder says that there are no more 10 buildings that you can stay inside safely. Another important aspect is that we have Syrian migrant and refugee workers in our country. They come to, due to a civil war, a war took place in Syria, for which Turkish government involved in and supported different jihadist organizations. They are right now a part of the working class of Turkey. However, on the other hand, Turkey's communist and honest progressive forces, union organizers, feminists and LGBTQ activists stand with Syrian migrant people against racism and lynchings that have been organized by Turkish chauvinist forces. So that's another reality when it comes to earthquake we should be aware of. Because these forces, these extreme right-wing provocators, currently are framing Syrian refugees as plunderers and opportunists. They say that Syrians are plundering shops and aid materials. They already provoked some racist mobs to be formed to attack on Syrians. Some people died because of that, unfortunately. However, as a general tendency, our people say no to fascist provocations, yes to the fraternity of Turkish, Kurdish and Syrian workers. Yes, we should acknowledge that there is an impact of racism among workers, but if you leave workers to themselves, working class people of Turkey have the capacity that they can resolve their problems. Our correspondents of our newspaper witnessed that, and for that reason, basically, these provocateur groups, they are constantly doing propaganda to frame the Syrians and other minorities in the group, also to in Turkey, also to Arab Alevis, LGBTQs, and Kurds, and all the others. With that being said, I would like to remind that these pogroms have the same exact reason why Erdogan is imposing SOE, state of emergency. Because state of emergency is against rising people's solidarity. When people get in solidarity, it boosts their self-confidence. People becomes the people. So fascist provocators and politicians are more likely on the scene because of this reason, against the people's solidarity. Because at the end of the day, racism is anti-working class, because working class and oppressed have one chance in front of the capitalist barbarism, it's unity, and racism is against the unity. Racism is to serve bourgeoisie and is a tool to perpetuate the capitalist power, and it's all reactionary forces. The other reason why they declared an state of emergency is because we have an election coming, probably May 15th, and the SOE is 3 months long, and it just applies to the region. Our forces the forces on the ground of labor, peace, and democracy, including socialists, communists, Kurds, Alevis, women, LGBTQ, workers' unions, and all the others, are concerning that the President Erdogan is going to use it as a leverage, push elections further. Erdogan does not want to step down easily. It seems like they are aware that they cannot leave power without being put in a trial. That might be the fear, we assume. After opposition forces call on Erdogan not to think about even rescheduling elections, the spokesman of Erdogan's palace, Ibrahim Kalin, said that we do not think of postponing the elections unless there is another political agreement. However, we are waiting for the report of the delegation of the Supreme Election Council, which went to the earthquake area, and right now they are checking if they can put ballot boxes in 3 months in the earthquake region. So here is the story that whether they are going to try to reschedule it depends on how fast their votes are decreasing. They are constantly checking their public support. However, Erdogan and his government are aware that they cannot reschedule or delay the election in the face of an organized society, which is much enabled by a rising people's and working class solidarity, because at the end of the day, the success of their neoliberal policies relies on brutal authoritarianism. We can see this pattern from demonstrations in Istanbul and Ankara last week, that in Istanbul, Workers' Party of Turkey, TIP, and Left Party, Sol, protested the corruption of government institutions and called them resign. They were brutally attacked by the police forces. In Ankara, People's Houses, HE, protested the governmental institutions' attempts to erase people's solidarity camps in Hatay, Antioch, and they were also brutally attacked and arrested by the riot police too. Other demonstrations came from soccer fans in a couple of different soccer match. Audience chanted "Government resign," which morally boosted people and drew attention to persecute football fans. Just for the same reason, Turkish government decided to shift all universities to remote education with the pretext of that student dormitories will be used for earthquake victims. However, our society is well aware that they just don't want to have any developing opposition within the universities. So that's basically the first part and what's going on in the region right now. I would like to ask Saidi to play the second video, if it is possible. You will see a moment of authoritarian capitalist order that's very striking. I will explain what the lady in the video says later.
Kaç saat oldu? 150 saat söyleşilmiş. Yani şükür olsun.
150 saat. Müjde size. Dinle abla. Sen müjde sürecindeki kurban olayım beni evine götürme diyor. Param yatıyor. Para aldı benden diyor. Ben sana kurban olayım ya. Bütün özellikleri sana kurban ederim.
Emine bakalım.
So that's a striking moment because the lady, Emine Doğu, who was removed from rubbles of her destroyed building in Hatay, Antakya, after 138 or 150 hours. And she says, "Don't take me to private hospital. I have no money." Let's think about that. You are like under the rubble over 130 hours at least. And you are thinking that. So that's basically the scene, the neoliberal authoritarian order in Turkey right now. So I provided you a grim account of the things, and believe me that there are still some not covered. One guy from another interview was saying that an earthquake victim says that, where are those warm hands of the state? People are saying that there is no state, and yes, that's correct, there is no state when it comes to the aid. However, Turkish state has enough security forces to be there. For example, the police attacked and arrested some socialists who were first responders in the region. They were there to help the people. Basically, when it comes to aid and rescue, there is no state. But when it comes to authority, control, hazing, there is the coercive forces of the state. So the state exists with its current form, a bourgeois state that protects the interest of the Turkish capitalists. And all these ruined buildings of Maraş earthquake were constructed by Turkish construction companies and monopolies with cheap and low quality construction material. For more than 20 years, Erdogan's party, AKP, and later its coalition couple, Nationalist Movement Party, MHP, for you to compare, they are the Turkish version of Tea Party in Turkey, let me say in that way, but more active. They have organizations like maybe comparable to KKK today, enabled construction companies to have enormous incentives and handsome deals everywhere in Turkey. Not just enabling, but also the government and its affiliated parties, affiliated groups, accumulated a huge wealth of construction out of the construction industry. Also, these companies were allowed by municipal governments with a reasonable price. So when you check this event, this phenomena, from all the angles, there are corruption, money, and clientelist patronage relationships. Safety apparently is not a concern for these capitalists and their administrators. For some background, again, that's another point when we talk about the earthquake. There was another big earthquake back in 1999. Again, the Turkish state did not send any proper aid to Düzce, the disaster zone, in the first week of the August 17, 1999 earthquake. Again, working people, socialists, trade unions, and democratic mass organizations that brought aid to the disaster zone and set up camps in the first week. In the following week, before the state brought aid, it chose to attack the existing 8 tents with riot police first, then provided its own aid. But even then, determined organizers, socialists, progressives, unions, and civil society continued along with working class people. And since the last big earthquake of 1999, Turkish state has taxed people for measures against the earthquakes, because so we can be well prepared for the next earthquake. But the amount of wealth it's accumulated would be enough to save thousands and thousands today. But they used that budget for their own ends to basically build new roads, which those roads are also destroyed during that earthquake. Like in the 1999, the government and its institutions does not allow to civil forces to help people in the region. Because they are the state, it's supposed to be their area. According to their perspective, if there is enormous anger and labor and devastation from the people of the region, they don't want to confront with the people right away. However, the government is always seeking for the ways to block people's solidarity if they see that they can do it. Why? Let's not forget, during the COVID-19 in the United States, after the mutual aid networks built in the United States as an expression of the people's solidarity, which in a very individualistic society initially, it boosted confidence of the United States people. People becomes the people, and made Democrats took a knee, and former President Donald Trump hide in the White House due to the demonstrations and that social outburst. I'm talking about George Floyd summer 2020. Going back for an historical account, how we end up here, how Turkish state came to this point. So after infamous January 24th decisions of 1980, Turkey welcomed privatization and flexibilization policies, which are two policies named always together with neoliberalism. It was an era where working class and socialist organizations were so strong in Turkey, and the government could not impose these policies, these neoliberal policies, easily. Turkish bourgeoisie of the time openly called Turkish army to fulfill its duty, for which they made a fascistic military coup on September 12th of 1980. They shut down unions, organizations, parties, arrested, persecuted, hanged a lot of revolutionaries and union leaders. In 2002, Justice and Development Party, Erdogan's party, came to power with a political motivation and economic program that they inherited from this coup, from that long tradition that started, not maybe started, but boosted with that coup. Erdogan's party is the most, in that sense, is the most capable and keen servant of international capital forces among the bourgeois governments of Turkey ever. One of the sharpest examples of that. They built their rule on two particular social base after the monopoly capital. First one is the real estate and construction industry, composed of 450,000 people and working poor masses. We can say that they can hijack the second part through their consent-taking mechanisms, religious propaganda, and basically leave people poor. Basically taking all their means and all their organizational means out of their hands. So why I am saying that, it is important to know this note to understand the nature of AKP supporter capital. To create such a plunder and exploitation order, Erdogan's party led to build an authoritarian system. They call it Turkish type of presidential system, which eliminates almost all the authorities of Turkish parliament in reality. We frame this as one man's dictatorship or one man's regime, a type of authoritarian bourgeois government, and in order to contend and control the opposition and the working class, Turkish rulers needed such a system. Especially it became a necessity for them after the social awakening of 2013 Gezi Park resistance. So, before we go another video and the questions part, as opposed to what official sources said, everything is not under control in Turkey. However, Labour Party of Turkey, MEP, along with the Workers' Party of Turkey, TIP, People's Democratic Party, HDP, Communist Party of Turkey, TKP, People's Houses, HE, Left Party, SOL, Hope Union, Umut Sen, and dozens of others are working all around the country to mobilize our peoples to get in solidarity. More broadly, countless other civil society organizations, working class unions, feminists, socialists, anarchists, environmentalist groups, and networks work together to help victims to recover from this situation. Especially you can encounter workers around the rubbles who just came there by themselves without any union or party or any other network. They just came over there voluntarily. This scene shows us that there is also a natural class solidarity shows itself. On the other hand, Turkey has been witnessing an arising working class demonstrations all across the country since before the earthquake. And these continue, and new strikes and walkouts pop up, such as in Mata automotive and Kartal municipality workers in Istanbul. Our country faced this earthquake, for your information, with an inflation reaching 200% and a housing crisis since May 2022 last year. As we say, we will clean this blood and dust together after that we will come back for taking account of this destructive capitalist massacre. People, we know the murderer, and we know that they are the ruling class and their representatives and their administrators, and they are trying to cover up for this social crime, for their social crime. Although there is an extreme oppressive nature of the government propaganda and the security forces, let's not forget the devil is not so terrible as he is painted. We call that solidarity gives life, profit kills. Let's not forget, let's organize to live. By saying that, we would like to also remind that Turkey has its own courageous working class history, revolutionary communists, strong Kurdish and Alevi movements, women's struggle history, LGBTQ history, a strong human rights advocacy history. All those exist as oppositional forces and hold the streets here and there. Even in these very suppressive conditions, we have strong oppositional, genuinely oppositional sources, oppositions. And I am saying this for the sake of internationalism and as a reply to some arguments that we can encounter in the West more frequently to orientalize the East. I mean specifically for this case, Turkish, Kurdish and Arab societies. So I want to mention about that. Again, we have wherever there are working class, wherever there are advocates of that, wherever people who are for their demands, for their freedom demands, fighting against the oppression, there is always hope. Saidi, could it be possible to turn on the... So currently you see a group of workers, automotive workers from Mata industry, call that no peace for the bosses when the workers hungry. So these demonstrations are across the country, here and there, and basically Erdogan's party also counting that when they declare OHAL, the SOE, to get control of these situations. So that's what I was going to say, more or less. We can go for the questions if you would like to. Thank you. Go for it. Oh, I'm not sure she's going to do that.
So if anybody has questions, we'll be switching from in person and online. If you have a question, just raise your hand. And speak into the microphone so that folks who are attending virtually can hear you.
First off, thank you for your talk. It was very informative. I wanted to ask, because you mentioned at a couple points that Hatay was especially harshly hit. And throughout, not only in Hatay, that also that the state response was massively delayed and largely punitive and not in the form of actual aid. I wanted to ask if you could go into a little more detail about what the relationship of sort of state, civil society, political organizations is on the ground in Hatay at present, if you could.
Of course. Any other questions?
Yeah, I was wondering if you could expand upon the relationship between the Turkish state, the emergency, and sort of the international community, international aid, how that sort of all has been interacting with the internationally. Yeah.
I think I can, pardon me.
I'm curious. I came here to the talk mainly because I have Syrian friends in Rehanda, and I know mainly from their perspective how it's been. But I just wanted to hear more about sort of how this event has shaped Syrian Turkish, Syrian Kurdish, perhaps Syrian Alawi relations in terms of organizing, partly because my sense is that there has been a fair amount of tension or non-solidarity between different groups in the area. So I just yeah, whatever you know, kind of how like this question, how are things on the ground now? What's happening?
Should I go for it? Okay. So when it comes to Hatay and Antakya in general, Antioch is as I said, is a historically Arab Alawi city, and during my time back in Turkey, and as we witnessed, Hatay is always become a place for the progressive movements, secular movements in a way. For years, around the policy of the Turkish state towards Syria, they wanted to change Hatay's political, cultural, and ideological structure. Back in 2000, I guess, around to 2010, there were bomb attacks in Hatay that's organized by the jihadist organizations, which the region was tried to be populated by these organizations, but the community solidarity did not allow that easily. So that was one thing that the government policy towards Syria find problematic. That was an obstacle in front of them. And to give a clue, for example, there are like 4 deputies of Turkish Workers' Party of Turkey, one of them coming from that region. So in that sense, there are strong community solidarity. So some journalists, when they went there and prepare a report, that they see, for example, there are moments that they see people do not have tents, people do not have toilets at the city center. So they have like these earthquake victims, they have to leave the city center and go to the rural areas every day, right? But this is being counted as like a new, as a base of a new gentrification operation in Hatay. So the Turkish state right now basically aiming through with its institutions to gentrify Hatay, as people expect, try to change the population of this space. So in that sense, what civil society does is that, again, since it's a space that's more like dominated by these progressive forces, they try to build their camps, focus their attention in that region, because it's one of the most torn region right now. Almost like over 5,000 of buildings out of these 18,000 buildings were destroyed in Hatay. They're building camps over there. But like a couple of days ago, they just attacked that camp that was built by the working peoples in Hatay. And they just, as far as I'm aware right now, they erased the camp right now and says that, no, we are the only coordination here. We are going to do and have all the control here. The Turkish state institution, disaster management presidency claimed that. So I hope that's more or less satisfied your question. So for the other questions is that Turkish state right now, like they are showing this question through the international press, as I understand. Yes, that's a humanitarian disaster. It's a catastrophe, but they do not basically show what kind of incompetency they have. And probably they are right now seeking financial support to reconstruct the region, because there is one reality with the AKP government. For years, if they want to do some financial projects or construction projects, they went to Qatar, they went to Saudi Arabia, they went to this country, that country, and they always sought for investment and support. And by using this support, this warm money, basically this capital, they basically reconstruct and gentrify the regions. Basically, right now, we are experiencing a situation where we can call it disaster capitalism. For example, President Erdogan said, we are going to reconstruct the region in a year. And right now, the international agents of the Turkish government, they are basically saying that, okay, then we need the humanitarian aid, we need the financial support, so we can reconstruct the region. Actually, for that, there is a presidential decree that because when you are doing city planning and urban planning, right, and the construction projects, first you need to have a planning obligation where you have to have check grounds scan to see if the ground is the eligible place that's enable like you to do construction, develop cities. Right now there is no more obligation for that, and that's another invitation for another big earthquake and destruction basically. But that is because as much as possible, as soon as possible, they want to build buildings and show the world, see how capable government we are, so we want to stay in power. That's the basic, like, basically their bet is the human lives to stay in power. So for the third question, relationship between the Syrian, Turkish and Kurdish people. Actually, if I'm not wrong, Marash, in 2014 or 2015, it was the first first city in Turkey that there was a demonstration of the working class unions that says that do not touch to my Syrian siblings. So that was a big working class demonstration, and it was basically a breathtaking moment for all the democratic forces, because Turkish governments or the some so-called oppositional forces to Turkish government, especially, they kept organized these lynching campaigns against the Syrian Arabs under the pretext of those like, oh, those are like, they are against our secular lifestyle and stuff like that. But the irony is, in a lot of like lynchings, people chanted like religious chants while they were lynching Syrian Arabs, and these people were called on like these refugees for years called on that, oh, they are changing our lifestyle. But there is an irony over there. So we see these like both Islamist and both so-called secularists. We do not think that's genuine, compatible with each other when it comes to the Syrian Arabs. Basically, it's blatant racism. However, I can say that working class people, again, yes, there is the seeds of racism, unfortunately, and here and there were lynchings. Some people, they were rescued by activists on the ground. I know one story that one young guy, he was waiting in front of a rubble, a Syrian refugee guy, and basically it was his home. And another guy in a mob said that, oh, see, this is a plunderer, let's beat him up. They beat him up, then they want to throw him out of a bridge. Activists on the ground, they took the guy. Basically, if there were no people, this guy was probably one of other dead person among those others killed by these racist mobs. So it's an even situation, I would say. Yes, I mean, the situation is not like very clearly under control when it comes to racism, but again, there are forces that resist against that.
Thank you so much. I'm actually an urban planner, and I was really curious to hear a bit more about like the example of Hatay, and you mentioned that through disaster capitalism, they're using this as an opportunity to even gentrify the downtown area, which was severely destroyed. Do you think there, like the sort of local community and the political organizations, are there venues through which they can kind of push back against this, especially with the state of emergency? Maybe not in other cities, but in the case of Hatay, for example, is this a possibility?
Well, by the way, sorry, do you have anyone else have any other questions?
I can ask one. I was also wondering about the disaster capitalism and like the using of the destruction to like gentrify the city and like rebuild it in a new way. If you think that like a part of that is the lack of response to like actually saving people as a way to like it drives down the population and therefore drives down wages as like another prong of this tactic.
I see. So when I come to your question, I believe, yes, there has to be ways to push back, but to be honest with you, as I hear from our correspondents on the region, there is an extreme solutionless right now. I mean, you see scenes that people, they carry their corpses on the motorcycles. They demand corpse bags basically to cover their deaths. You may see that in the hospital's corridors, not in the morgues, that there are still dead bodies covered with the blankets. They are waiting to be ordered. So the situation right now, basically, we have to first heal our wounds then. But during that situation, I mean, again, people's solidarity is the one base that we can get out of this situation, get out of this solutionless. And people's solidarity, the urge of that, let's go to the region and help the people. Basically, I believe that one of the most triggering thing for the Turkish state to take urgent action, because they are aware that an organized society, they cannot bear with that. Because at the end of the day, as we see from the school books, as we see from all our countries, neoliberalism breeds, or capitalism in general, breeds authoritarianism unless there is a resistance against that. So basically one man's dictatorship is a way to do that. So yes, there has to be ways to push back that, but again, it's possible with, Turkish society is recovering in a way that right now from a long political turmoil, long political solutionlessness, at the moment gaining more currency among the people. Because if Erdogan and the government, if they did one thing very successful, they always curse, they always hate people, they always call on, they always frame the people, they always create a scapegoat successfully. And with that, basically, they were successful to stay in power for 20 years, more than 20 years. But right now, how much their discourse work, that's questionable. When I come to your answer, your question is that, yes, Turkish government, the state was not ready, did not have that capacity to basically rescue and bring aids to people. It's not specific, of course, to Turkish state. As a capitalist organization, as a tool of as a coercion tool of the Turkish capitalist classes. For example, you might see other independent examples. For example, first days from Zonguldak, a province that where Turkish mines mostly located, tons of miner workers, they wanted to go to region, but their bosses, they did not allow them because it's not profitable. It's going to decrease the profits. There were some miners' unions, they were able to go. 3 or 4 buses they could bring to the regions. But other than that, there were workers that they individually, they just took any vehicle, any road that they can reach the region. But mostly they were prevented from their bosses. For example, there are other very relentless examples. On February 20th, last week, there was another quake in the same region, and the employer of one textile factory, that textile factory was also affected by the quake, and he did not allow his workers go out. He said, okay, come back and continue to work. And no one knows if factories was safe or not. Or another example that there are no like disaster help, salary hikes for the workers, or some earthquake victims, workers who are earthquake victims, they couldn't go to their jobs naturally, and they were fired from their jobs with a text message. I can say that yes, I mean, this system and that state in Turkey with its all capacity, it was not ready to basically answer this disaster. And but they are ready to just gentrify and transform the region to more profitable place where it's open to any other disasters. So for that reason we say, let's organize to remain alive. That's our motto right now. I hope these satisfied your questions.
Just as a follow-up to the urban planning question about Hatay, I've read the reports. I understand the non-enforcement of building codes in the last 20 years, and that being part of the neoliberal project and the sort of construction cronyism of Erdogan's party. I'm curious if you can talk about why that was so pronounced in Hatay, and if there were other things happening in Hatay, or if it was just that. Yeah.
So basically one of the social base, again, Erdogan's party was composed of the real estate agencies and the construction companies. And basically they, whatever wealth they created, most of them, it came from that industry. And last years they declared some, that's called building forgiveness, because like there are buildings that, for example, people add some balcony or just destroyed one wall without getting a permission, or like a column without applying for formal authorities. And it was a kind of a big trend within the society. But can we basically blame the society for that when there is a very flexible and kind of like not cautious government and an understanding already over there? I do not think so. So they declared a couple of buildings forgiveness where they just let people have their houses in the shape that basically it was not safe. And they used that tactic to gain more base from the people, basically.
Why, like Hatay in particular? Like I'm thinking
Hatay, I believe it's has a more natural causes, because most of the region has unsafe housing, basically. But it was first one of the center of the earthquake, and second, it's right at the middle of three plate over there. So basically, if it was another city, they would have the same result, basically. I mean, at least that could be an answer. Maybe I'm sure there are more into Hatay, because also like we should say that yes, AKP is responsible party for that, AKP and MHP, Nationalist Movement Party coalition. but also like there were a couple of Hatay municipalities in Antakya, in that province, which has different townships, and some of the townships, municipalities, not just under AKP, but also CHP, People's Republican Party, which they also allowed construction bosses to do construction without safety regulations, which are also like a part of right now our political talking points.
I just had an additional comment to your question, maybe
Please go
will
for
help,
it.
but from what I know, there are several other factors. The fact that it's very close to the kind of fault line. It's also on the Orontes River floodplain, so you have soils that are kind of very saturated, so there's this phenomenon called soil liquefaction. So some of the earthquake engineers that I have worked with in the past, I'm also from Turkey, they mentioned that this is an issue in the region. The other interesting thing, it hasn't been fully studied, but people are looking into it, is that Antakya is a really old city, and there have been several construction projects in the past where they've dug and they've found huge archaeological remains. So what I've heard, just reports on the ground, is that some of the buildings were built with very shallow foundations, because if they dig, it's very likely that it's built on top of an older city. So the center itself, and there were older buildings that weren't up to code. So it's a mix of factors, and very important for reconstruction to kind of think about that as well.
Thank you. As far as I know from the United States history, it's when after the Katrina hurricane, for example, the people were staying for years and years in the tents, in the containers, in those prefabric houses. But then they didn't understand why this situation continued, and they see that like the companies, the local authorities over there, they start to build private schools, expensive, gentrified neighborhoods. So a capitalist class and its state basically sees as an opportunity. But while they see that opportunity, they count that how we can derive legitimacy out of that. And basically this seeming strategy of the current Turkish government is that to build houses in a year, which is impossible, and it's so dangerous also too, because there are still like small earthquakes continue, more than like 100 happened already in these 3-4 weeks. And engineers, civil engineers especially, they warn the governmental authorities not to do that.
Yeah, to comment on that, I think the comparison to Katrina is interesting because during that there was a lot of demonization of like the African American community, oh, they're looting and that's forth, which reminded me of what you were saying about how the Turkish media is sort of depicting Syrians as like looters. So do you think like this could lead to like further like racism? Like, or do you think, like, where do you think the trajectory is? Because I know you mentioned that there's some solidarity, but there's also like some racism. So, yeah.
Not the Turkish media, but it was not a general trend among the Turkish media, but it was a trend in social media, led by parties. For example, there is a party called Victory Party, led by Ümit Özdağ. He is an ex-deputy of the MHP, Nationalist Movement Party. Their other name is Grey Wolves. So he was the one that's saying that when I came to power, I'm going to send all these Syrians back in their country. And basically with this aspect, he looks like very, with his discourse and propaganda, he looks like Trump. And from their party account, they say that the soldiers, the police forces has to have shooting order on site if there are plunderers. And they basically provoke this language through social media. And you saw like thousands of troll accounts, social media trolls. They shared these posts and stuff. Basically, it was a big provocation. But again, some deputies from the main bourgeois opposition, other social democratic, socialist, communist, progressive forces, they basically do counter propaganda actively to stop that, because it's if it develops, it's not something controllable, and it could lead something else. And on the ground, people, since they are solutionless, I do believe that they do not want to have another big, problem, especially involved with racism and stuff. But yes, there is another side of this thing. We might expect that because Erdogan government stayed in power by using these tactics, dividing people, creating something for themselves. So there are right now thousands of millions of earthquake victims, and we might expect in the near future that with his discourse he can create my own reasonable earthquake victim, who is a good boy, good girl. Others, they keep complaining they are troublemakers or something else. So that might be another thing, and this discourse can be racialized also too.
I think we're going to do one last round of questions. I have actually one or two questions. One, I know you're a journalist who's been here during the crisis of the earthquake. I wonder if you could talk about the perspective of the Turkish diaspora, what you think the responsibility is of people who are from the region but not there on the ground. And then I wanted to ask, maybe or maybe not, you can address this, but for example, the Cuban government sent a medical brigade of doctors to Turkey as an act of real material solidarity. And I wonder if you could talk about Erdogan and his position in sort of global geopolitics. Turkey is, of course, an important NATO country. So thinking especially in contrast to a country like Syria, and also the sort of mainstream news cycle has really pushed this crisis sort of out of our news feed. So I was just wondering if I could get your perspective on that. Erdogan has been in power for so long. There aren't sort of as serious global repercussions as there have been on countries like Cuba, Syria, Venezuela, for other things. So his role and his importance, I guess, to the U.S. and Western countries, and why this is sort of getting pushed aside. So those are kind of two things that you can maybe or maybe not address.
Okay, no.
I just wanted to add a comment just in response to the question about rising racism in Turkey. So, I mean, obviously, it's very easy on the socialist left to always veer toward extreme pessimism or extreme optimism, like, oh, the people are going to unite, the system is doomed, or everything is terrible. But I'm trying to be sober here. But I mean, I would say that from what we've seen, again, I'm also observing from afar or whatever. But from what we've seen there, if you look at a group like MHP, which is the other coalition party other than the AKP that was mentioned, and these are the sort of the attack dogs of the AKP in present practice, right? Local supporters of the MHP on the ground who were affected by the earthquake, you could imagine them being driven to something like Zafer Partisi with their we'll shoot the looters and we'll invade Iraq and we'll invade Macedonia and whatever Ümit Özdağ is saying today. But you could imagine they would be driven to a right-wing but not pro-Erdogan party. But on the contrary, there was in Deutsche Welle, which is is not it's not a left-wing Turkish communist underground news source. It's Deutsche Welle. They were broadcasting like MHP supporters saying, "Looks like these communist terrorists are the ones on our side, and not the MHP who I vote for." So there's a little cause for like sort of baseline social optimism. The people whose overwhelming social programming is to distrust the idea of socialism, unity, anti-system solidarity, etc., are actually being like, maybe we should try this instead. So, just a little glimmer of hope note there.
So thank you for that comment. When it comes to diaspora and community, I would say, from a humble point, is that first, because we live basically in New York, in general in the United States, and it's at the middle of like all the international community, and for that reason this earthquake, and also like we see that the situation in the Western media, how it's pushed out of the political agenda. So we need to first come together and continue the donation efforts, at least open up the channels that we can create the financial and material solidarity. But solidarity also another part, which is the political solidarity, to empower the earthquake victims politically, because we shouldn't forget, again, earthquake is natural, and its consequences are political and socio-economic. We see that outside this earthquake is being basically framed as like just a political humanitarian crisis, but it's basically a humanitarian crisis that's caused by the capitalist authoritarian order in Turkey. So we need to be aware of that. And for that reason, basically for our communities, we can call them to come together and build their solidarity networks, but plus also call our US friends, activists, organizers, progressive socialists, communists, liberals, everyone that who care about the subject, to support us basically, because so basically there are two things in the region right now, most importantly. First, to keep these first responders, these solidarity networks safe, and show that that's happening in the region, that the riot police, the municipal security forces, they are interfering those responders. That's the first thing. And the second thing, that we need to show these, I told you, these Afat bureaucrats and their harassments, how like these, even like these small passive-aggressive attitudes means a lot for us, because like it basically prevents for those workers, for those union workers, miners, to rescue the people. And the other thing is that basically just we need to keep international community aware that Erdogan and its government, they should not think anything about to reschedule this election. Of course, the struggle of the labor, peace and democracy, it's not just about the ballot boxes, but it's about the streets also too. But again, it's a space, a political space, where different forces express their political choices and their future, more or less. So they should not, we should defend that elections should be in a free, democratic environment, in a democratic atmosphere. That's one thing. And the second thing is that, well, it's correct that Turkey is always like missed when we do these grand international analysis and whatever. And for example, one of them, I think it's 74 Cuban Missile Crisis, where no one knows what is the first part of this missile crisis, but the United States actually placed missiles in Turkey, which is the one of the most advanced station of NATO, have tons of NATO bases in the region. and so it's geopolitically important. There is always a cliche in Turkish elementary school saying that Turkey is a bridge between the continents and stuff. But it's true that when it comes to also like Turkish government representatives, when they threaten Germany, saying that, okay, then you are going to obey whatever we are going to do. Otherwise, we are going to let the Syrian migrants, refugees influx Europe. So Turkey has such a geopolitical position. When it comes to the Cuban aid, I mean, a lot of groups across the world, around the world, they came to help us. And it actually create an opportunity for the progressive forces on the ground that it break racism, in a way. It becomes a base. Because, I mean, yes, these rescue teams, maybe some of them organized by the state institutions of these respective countries, but at the end of the day, these are representing those nationalities, especially Greek, Israeli, and Armenian teams meant a lot, because the thing is that Turkish chauvinism, Sunnite chauvinism, it's always built on anti-Jewishness, anti-Semitism, anti-Armenian, and anti-Greek sentiments. Actually, even the Kurdish regional government from Iraq, they sent teams to Turkey, aid to Turkey, but it was never mentioned on the media, although, as far as I read from the news, that President Erdogan, then it has been said that he thanked to the regional government of Kurdistan in Iraq. But other than that, yes, that's a source of motivation. And Cubans, I mean, they are everywhere, all the time. They always try to help the people. And yes, in that context, I could say, just as a short statement, we should be aware Turkey's position in all those political turmoil, because it's very determinative and it's very kind of eye-opening to see what's happening actually in the region. And it's a kind of very loyal NATO country, because there were other assumptions about Turkey's getting away from the United States or not. There might be temporary situations, but it's not the case when it comes to the gist of the story.
Thank you, everybody. Akeem, if you have any last final words that you want to say for the teach-in, while you do, I have a clipboard of name and email if you'd like to stay in touch with the organizing and campaigning work that Akeem is doing. Feel free to leave your name and your email, and I can pass it around as Akeem gives us his last words.
So, I mean, thank you for everyone coming. I'm glad to share this space with all of you. Again, we say that solidarity provides, building solidarity gives us what gives us life. Profit kills, and let's not forget that. Let's organize to stay alive, basically, because this system does not want or ignore our livelihoods. If it cares about just nothing but one thing, it's the profit, and it's exposed with this earthquake. Again, earthquake is natural, but its consequences are political and socioeconomic. Thank you for coming again.
Thank you so much, Akeem. We're so grateful to have this conversation. So 2 resources for everybody here and everyone online to know about. The People's Forum continues to have their own fundraising campaign. We had set a number of goals, and we're excited to say that we meet those goals, but it's still, there's no shortage of support that we can provide. the people on the ground. So if you would like to contribute to our ongoing campaign, you can text Solidarity Now to 44321, or you can take a look at the links on any of our social media bios. It should be there. Another resource, and for viewers who may be outside the U.S., the Daimer Turkish and Kurdish Community Center is also hosting a fundraiser. You can find that on crowdfunder.uk, I believe. So it's hosted in the UK. And the final announcement is that, we're all here to talk about a major crisis and symptom of global capitalism. And as we started talking about NATO, we are mobilizing a number of buses to go to Washington, D.C. on March 18th. We're going to hold a major anti-war rally that is going to also sort of commemorate the anniversary of the U.S. invasion of Iraq. So another major crisis resulting from global capitalism, imperialism across the world. So if you'd like to get on one of the buses, you can purchase your tickets at the People's Forum website. It'll be really exciting. You'll be with a group of people the whole time. I think it should be very exciting if you're interested. And so thank you all so much for coming. We will continue to have the clipboard, and thank you.